For years, many have pointed to a growing gender gap in American politics. Polls have shown a long-term trend of young women moving increasingly to the left, while young men turn more to the right. The divide could sharpen as November's election is now a contest between a Democratic woman, Kamala Harris, and a Republican man, Donald Trump. But my next guest says that's not the full story, that the two parties are not so much divided by gender, but rather by their views on gender. Derek Thompson is a staff writer at The Atlantic. Derek, welcome. First, I just want to clarify the issue. There is a gender gap and has been for a long time, right, in terms of who votes for which party.
There's been a very stark gender gap in the American electorate for decades. A majority of American men have not voted for the Democratic candidate for president since 1976. That was for Jimmy Carter. And women have not consistently voted for Republicans since 1980. In fact, this concept of a gender gap was first mentioned in a Washington Post article in 1981, remarking that the election of Ronald Reagan, the clear election of Ronald Reagan, saw men moving to the Republican Party with women moving to the Democratic Party. So we've been living in a world with a clear gender gap for at least 40, maybe up to 50 years. But it's only the last few years that people have paid closer attention to this divergence among younger men and younger women.
And to you, the most interesting thing is that we are now dividing, and this is new, in terms of views on gender. Meaning, for example, in the old days, a few decades ago, men and women had roughly the same views or roughly the same divide on abortion. But that's now dramatically different.
That's right. Historically, if you ask men and women, are you pro-choice, are you pro-life? It was very difficult to tell the difference between men and women. But in the last few years, women have become much more likely to say that they're pro-choice rather than pro-life, while men have basically stayed the same. But other polls show that men are, in fact, shifting to the right at pretty much the same rate at which young women are shifting to the left. There's polls showing that men are more likely to vote Republican or vote for Donald Trump than at any time this century. So, yes, there is some polling that is suggesting that not only do you have this long-standing gender gap in the overall electorate, you have this polarization happening within the younger electorate among millennials and Gen Z, where they seem to be rolling away from each other in an accelerating pace.
So what is going on, Derek? Why is this happening?
There's a couple of things that could be happening. One thing that could be happening is that they're polarizing each other. You know, some people that I talk to say that as women move to the left, it's polarizing young men who are saying, you know what, I don't support what feminism means anymore, so I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. Other people that I've talked to, including Richard Reeves, who's a very wonderful researcher on issues facing young boys and men, have essentially said that the Democratic Party hasn't opened up to young men in a significant way. The Democrats and progressives are much better, he says, at identifying examples of toxic masculinity than at identifying examples of positive masculinity that are distinct from femininity. But to your earlier point, I think that the strongest evidence that we have is that this isn't just about gender. It's about the way that Democrats and Republicans think about gender. So one way it was put to me is that it's not as if, Republicans are from Mars and men are from Venus. It's that Republican men and women are from Mars and Democratic men and women are from Venus. And so essentially you can, look at the way that, say, J.D. Vance talks about the fact that childless women, aren't doing their duty, or the way that Tim Walz says that the Republican Party has become a bunch of he-man women haters. This is the way in which I think that the parties themselves are talking about gender in very, very different ways. And that, I think, is new.
This is the kind of point I think that James Carville is making when he says that the Democratic Party has become too feminized, that it sounds too feminized and it drives young men away, right?
I know that he said that. I know it was controversial when he said that. And the way that I prefer to reframe it is to put it in the way that people like Richard Reeves have said it, which is that, whether or not the Democratic Party is too feminized or progressivism is too feminized, I'm not sure that I'm an expert in the sort of optimal level of feminization of any particular party. What I feel more comfortable is saying something like this. I think progressives, and especially very online progressives, have gotten extremely articulate at pointing out examples of toxic masculinity. I don't see as much emphasis on the left of highlighting examples of positive masculinity that is distinct from feminism or distinct from femininity. And the fact is, men vote too. And if progressives aren't going to offer a robust vision of masculinity for young men who are looking for that, then they are leaving the stage empty. And an empty stage will be filled by people like Donald Trump, who has a kind of apex victim masculinity, where he holds himself up as the strongest man, but also feels extremely victimized by the elites. And then you also, I think, on the right have a kind of traditional Puritan kind of masculinity offered by the vice presidential candidates that Donald Trump has run with, like Mike Pence and J.D. Vance, who I don't think are the same kind of apex predators that Donald Trump is, but clearly offer, I think, another kind of very traditional kind of masculinity. I think if Democrats leave that stage bare, someone else will fill it. And right now, the polls seem to show that young men are indeed listing to the right, I think because they think the right is the only party that is talking directly to them.
Derek Thompson, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Next on GPS, how many of us wish we were better at communicating with others? Well, my next guest says it is a skill set that can be learned. We'll talk all about it when we come back.